Jesus. Two yang, one yin. It's a yang yin line. Three yang, old yang line. Sounds like I'm saying old young line. 2 yin, 1 yang, yang line. Two yang, 1 yin, yang yin line. It's like a little robot. Got this really cool megalodon shark tooth. It is ancient and so incredibly cool looking. It's intense, man. Bam. Terrifying. Two yang, 1 yin, yang yin line. Got this durga incense going. It smells like roses. I love it. Probably my favorite so far. Two yin, 1 yang, yang line. Our primary hexagram, the bottom or inner trigram, will be read as broken, solid, solid. I believe that's Xun, wind, or wood. Xun, wind, or wood. Xun is both wind and living plants. Whatever penetrates, spreads, and grows, shaping itself to the space available or shaping that space to its own nature. She is responsive flexibility, sensitively improvising and adapting. Like the wind, she can always find a way through because she never creates any resistance, and so her influence is subtle and gradual, but far-reaching. In the family of trigrams, Xun is the eldest daughter, gentle and submissive. She belongs to the southeast and to late spring and early summer. And the top or outer trigram will be read as broken, broken, solid. This is Gen Mountain. I definitely don't know if all of my pronunciations are going to be correct through this entire reading, so bear with me. Gen Mountain. The mountain is still. It is a limit where you must stop. Gen brings each cycle to an end, defining a space where we can recognize, assimilate, and complete our experience. He creates a personal still center amid change where we can retreat for perspective and a firm foundation for new growth. He is well-grounded, confident, and of independent spirit. He is still and knows. Mountain is the youngest son, child of maturity. In the cycle of directions and seasons, he is the northeast, late winter approaching spring, the pivot between cycles. Gen Mountain above Xun, wind, or wood give us the primary hexagram, 18. I believe that's degeneration. Or something about what's spoiled. The changing line 2, once it transforms from an old yang to a young yin, our bottom or inner trigram for our supporting hexagram will then be broken solid. So Gen Mountain beneath Gen Mountain, which is a supporting hexagram of 52. We will get the titles to our hexagrams from Lu I-ming's Taoist I Ching, which he wrote in 1796 as a Taoist adept. It's quite alchemical in nature. Degeneration, hexagram 18, our primary hexagram. Correcting degeneration by abandoning the false and returning to the true. Correcting what has been spoiled, I think is what it's called in other translations. And we got that. I did a year ahead spread with I Ching cards, and that was the very center of the entire year. 52, our supporting hexagram, which puts our primary hexagram in a broader context and influence, a direction of travel, an underlying issue that has to do with you and your relationship to it all. Mountain, nurturing energy by quietude, hexagram 52. We'll find out our secret hexagram at the very end, which is the underlying influence behind the situation. And then we'll do a summation. So to start out, we'll look in this little I Ching tarot deck with some pretty cool pictures on them. What images Kibi used to illustrate these readings, these hexagrams. 18 she calls work on the decayed. Work on what has been spoiled is another way of saying it. Looks like Avatar, an earthbender with like a sinus infection. Let's read the booklet here. Don't get a sinus infection, whatever you do, those hurt. Work on the decayed, retain internal corruption, reform period. When there is poor ventilation inside an organization or within one's family, resulting in corruption and confusion, trying to accomplish reform, the cause becomes apparent when the symptoms worsen. Very good point. Sounds about right. Next, as a supporting hexagram, which again puts our primary hexagram in a broader context and influence, a direction of travel, an underlying issue that has to do with you and your relationship to it all. 52, the immobility / mountain. '52. Comparable, steadfast, silent, patient, stubborn. a series of mountains and an unmoving will. A strong will gives you the power to endure, but if you go too far, you become stubborn. Even if you see something and feel it, not moving is better. Looks like a Koopa Troopa. Right? Mario would jump on that in a heartbeat. You know he wants to. Or Yoshi. Swallow him and shit out an egg. Don't swear. Alright, and next we're going to look at this cool deck, which I don't suggest picking up. I've said that multiple times, but a lot of the cards came messed up. Other than that, it's an incredible deck. I Ching Shadow Integration Oracle. Primary hexagram 18. Work on the decayed. Work on the decayed signifies a time of addressing and correcting past errors, decay, or neglect. It represents the need for renewal, cleansing, and taking responsibility for past failings. Regeneration begins with conscious effort. Confront areas in your life that have become stagnant or corrupted, taking ownership of past choices. Integrate the shadow of denial or blame by actively engaging in the work of healing and restoration. Transformation begins with honest self-assessment. Seeing things in a completely different light after checking out Doje's channel, Online Meditation, on YouTube here. I'll put a link in the description box below, but it's on Dzogchen, and it's the opposite of work. It's basically your most natural state. So a lot of this stuff you're going to listen to from a ton of different lenses, but it may or may not reflect the non-duality inherent within the I Ching itself. So I want to point that out a little bit. Hexagram 52. Which somehow I have completely out of order. My apologies. So I knocked these over. There's also a possibility that is hiding under something here in my garage. Because I think, yeah, it was the last reading. I knocked these all over the floor. If we can't read it, we can't read it, but I'd really love to. 50, 51, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64. Jeez. Can't believe it. Again, apologies. It's not going to be under that. Well, I guess we'll have to find that card. I didn't even know I was missing it. That's pretty interesting. Talk shit about this deck, and then the next thing you know, can't even use the next card. So I do like it, though. Gives like a Carl Jung kind of perspective. Next, we will read from Hilary Barrett's I Ching, Walking Your Path, Creating Your Future. If you're just starting out reading I Ching for yourself, I highly recommend it. It's got incredible information right in the front. A table that you can easily find your hexagram in, a breakdown on all the trigrams, way to do readings. And it's just incredibly simplified in a beautiful way, very poetic as well. Highly recommend picking up a copy. That along with Beneville Wen. Louis Ming, if you really want to get like into the thick of it. I love that stuff. 18, our primary hexagram. Corruption. When we approach the I Ching to consult the Oracle, the question or questions we bring to it will always have the context of how can I act in creative relation with the spirits or forces shaping this moment of time. Or, you know, flow with the Tao. something like that. Key questions: what is behind this trouble? What is the hidden cause? Oracle: corruption, creating success from the source, fruitful to cross the great river. Before the seed day, 3 days. After the seed day, 3 days. In ancient China, ancestors angered by neglect would send sickness and misfortune. This is corruption, something dark, like a curse, lurking under the surface of life and manifesting as patterns of negative experience. We don't have to believe in angry ancestors to be haunted by corruption. Whether we inherit its darkness from our past, our culture, or through our parents. When you receive Hexagram 18, it is a time to examine those old patterns at last. To seek out their source and give it due honor and attention. When you understand where your experience comes from, you can restore the creative flow and make a genuinely new beginning. Dorje would say that they're self-liberating, that you let go of the story and remain in the moment, and things self-liberate. The more we go at them with a specific tactic, oftentimes we're reifying, we're just causing, everything has its opposite. So and what is that other saying? What you resist persists. Where are we at? Yeah, when you understand where your experience comes from, you can restore the creative flow and make a genuinely new beginning. You will need to commit yourself to the journey and take the risk of crossing the great river into unknown territory. And you will need to pay careful attention to the process. Before Seed Day, which marks the beginning of a new cycle of time, you'll need to identify the source of the corruption and prepare for change. Afterwards, you need to pay attention to the needs of the new growth. Each of these phases has only a modest duration. You're invited to attend and examine, but not to dwell on this change for a lifetime. Another term he used was co-emergent luminosity, all appearances in each other. And that the void isn't vacant, or the nothingness, or the ground of being, or consciousness is cognizant. Image: below the mountain is the wind, corruption. A noble one rouses the people to nurture character. The mountain traps and limits the movement of the wind, making for stale, unhealthy air, an invisible corruption, poisoning from within. But a noble one transforms this picture. He stirs people up like the wind and nurtures their character like a sheltering mountain. This can work among people or within an individual. Inner movement and awakening transform limitation into a protective covering for growth. Sequence: corruption follows from Hexagram 17 following. Following people with joy means there are things to be done, and so corruption follows. Corruption means things to be done. Following is simply guided from moment to moment by the invisible currents beneath the surface of events, which means you have to be with the moment. Eventually, the flow carries you to a place where there are things to be done, and it's time to interrogate the hidden causes and bring them into the light of day. Another thing he was saying, which was interesting. So I wouldn't consider myself an expert on even Taoism, and this Dzogchen path is something that seems to harmonize really well with Taoism from what I've seen. And the way it points so directly is just phenomenal. So I'm absolutely in love with it. But what Dorje was talking about was that it's not like you're arriving at a mountain. It's like you're seeing the mountain that's already there. That being bringing things into the light of day and being with the moment and finding out the difference between our titles to things and the expanded consciousness through which all things are happening that don't require titles whatsoever, that you couldn't possibly narrow them to those titles by any means. Anyway, you can tell I'm pretty excited about this Dzogchen stuff. I picked up a bunch of books from Longchenpa and the Dzogchen founders and people who very still ignorant and beginning at this, so bear with me. But I'm excited about these books. They do readings of a lot of these books on their channel. I'm gonna keep gassing them up because it's my new favorite thing. Hexagram 52, stilling. Key questions. What if there were nothing you had to do now? And this is our supporting hexagram, which puts our primary hexagram in a broader context and influence, a direction of travel, an underlying issue that has to do with you and your relationship to it all. Key questions. What if there were nothing you had to do now? What if there were nowhere else you had to be? Where is your inner point of balance? Oracle, stilling your back, not grasping yourself, moving in your rooms, not seeing your people, not a mistake. Look at this incredible ideogram, I believe is what this is called, or ideograph. It's like an eye. It said not seeing your people. Very cool. It's the first time my attention's been drawn to that. To still yourself is to come to rest in your own right place. It's not the opposite of motion, but of being pushed into motion by outside influences. Whether you move or stop is determined inwardly by your sense of the nature of the time. Attaining this kind of stillness means firmly, even stubbornly, resisting the forces that would disrupt your equilibrium. Hold yourself still, as if in meditation. Don't seek to grasp yourself by hunting down your every thought, self-liberating thoughts. You can no more make them stop by force of will than you can make your back still by holding it with your hands. Instead of twisting and spinning in circles trying to grasp yourself, keep still. In the same way, you can move freely in your rooms or the chambers of your mind, which can be just as crowded, and simply not see the other people there, because you hold yourself still and do not resonate with them. Even if you feel as if you ought to be constantly sensitive to their presence and needs, in a time of stilling, it is no mistake to exclude all these things and be quiet within yourself. Image. Joined mountains, stilling. A noble one reflects and does not come forth from his situation. Whatever upheavals take place around it, the mountain is still. The noble one in his environment is like two mountains, joined together, present to one another, and not reacting. He is still inwardly and reflects. He is still outwardly, staying within his situation, not seeking to act on it or escape from it. Outer and inner stillness reinforce one another. Sequence. Stilling follows from hexagram 51, shock. Things cannot end with stirring up. Stop them. And so stilling follows, which means stopping. There's a natural alternation between change and stillness, and in human experience, a time of shock and reactions to reactions to reactions eventually needs to be stilled. Change consolidated, and equilibrium restored. First the drum is struck, and the spreading vibrations set the whole drumhead quivering. Then you bring your hand down to damp the vibrations and still the drum. We have a changing line here, changing line 2, which puts a pin in the map to say you are here, or at least here are some places you may find yourself. They take precedence over all other elements and are the most focused part of the reading. Changing line 2 has the general context, the heart's perception, the emotional center, where you make and feel connections. And changing line 2. For hexagram 18, degeneration or corruption, says, ancestral mother's corruption does not allow constancy. The mother is profoundly committed to provide nourishment and space for her family to grow. The ancestral mother's corruption means that this provision and commitment isn't working. It is not possible to carry this situation through to the desired outcome. What's started is not sustainable. Things cannot come to full growth. Perhaps a lack of resources means there is not enough available to give. Perhaps the reality of the situation simply makes your vision unfeasible, and mother's corruption lies in not letting go. In any case, you cannot bring about the resolution you want just by forging on. Instead, you need to develop personal boundaries, neither too rigid nor too porous, that allow you to respond without reacting. You need to recapture some independence of soul. Next, we'll look at Benabel Wen's I Ching The Oracle, a practical guide to the Book of Changes, an updated translation annotated with cultural and historical references, restoring the I Ching to its shamanic origins. Primary hexagram 18, our primary hexagram 18, Degeneration. I wanted to do a reading earlier than this, but usually I do them at night, and I've been so incredibly exhausted. I saw on the Schumann report that it was intense the last handful of days here, and man, have I felt it. I didn't realize that was happening till after, but good God. Something slammed me, and I had a little bit of time off today. So thankfully I get to do it when I'm actually awake. Hexagram 18, Benabel Wen calls decay, or gu, G-U. The Oracle. An infestation results in the decay of matter. Dogma causes degeneration. There has been spoilage and degeneration, so it is critical to take action immediately. Great obstacles to come, but take bold action to go out and confront those obstacles before they come for you. Those who can survive this stage come through the other side emanating with greatness. Sign of great power after the rebirth. So another thing I'm learning is that there are, secret revelations within teachings that not necessarily everybody gets to hear. And the most direct pointing reduces dogma, essentially. If you know that this is all Buddha consciousness being expressed, then really it's the great equalizer, you might say. And the idea that we're already in heaven, so to speak, and it's our inability to see that is the corruption. You need a lot less dogma for that. Often dogma can be used to corrupt. It can take something that is ineffable, and maybe even in the initial desire to make it accessible to others, there's also inherent in it the danger that people are going to latch onto the words and look at it through the intellectual mind that is not the mind of Tao or the Buddha consciousness or the luminescent or whatever enlightened being. It's not able to see that. So a lot of this, in my mind, and in mushroom use or hallucinogenic use, shamanic practices, is to loosen up the attachment to our definitions and that side of our brain, so to speak, and to be able to not just put ourselves in cages constantly and be shackled by dogma. It's a liberation. Worms on decaying matter, pestilent. The mountain wind spreads the worms on decaying matter. There has been spoilage and the food in the bowl decays, sprouting worms. But there is still the chance to make reparations for the spoilage. A necessary, difficult part in the cycle of life. The sage uplifts the people by teaching them the ways of virtue. Such teachings reverse the natural course of decay and remove the stagnation. The great sage is one who motivates the people like the wind that carries seeds up the mountain, auspicious to cross the great stream. You have been in a state of stagnation for a while, and as a result, there is degeneration, and you are headed toward a stage of decay. It is critical to take action immediately to prevent further atrophy. Jia is one of the 10 heavenly stems, yang in its qi nature, associated with the Wu Jing phase, wood, the eastern direction, the spring season, and the planet Jupiter. During the Shang dynasty, it corresponded with one of the 10 days of the week. You will need 3 days before the critical point and 3 days after for the full endeavor to be a success. There must be adequate preparation before that critical point, and then afterward, adequate reflection. The indication of 3 days prior to a critical point and 3 days after suggests the need for planning and a well-defined exit strategy. For matters relating to spellcrafting and ritual work, Hexagram 18 indicates that such work is to be done between the hours of 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. That kind of thing is the reason I like to do these readings around then. I'll meditate usually up until then, but I've been passing out. So incredibly exhausted. The English translation of Hexagram 18's title bellies its favorable nature. This is a hexagram of great power. After all, the final message is that it's advantageous to cross the great stream. Or recognize that it's already been crossed in that direct point. The idea that we have to, there's got to be a progression, including, I would think, the 3 days ahead, 3 days, or during, and then 3 days after would be. But you can take the energy of something and recognize its co-emergent luminosity. It's all Buddha mind, really. So that's the funny thing about these teachings, is they're meant to be left behind. All of it is, eventually. It can't get you across the river that you're already across. It merely is there to show you maybe behind the veil a little bit with poetry and all this stuff. But you could never fill any book, no matter how long or who wrote it, that could encapsulate what this is. It's almost sacrilegious to talk about, you know what I mean? That kind of idea. Probably the deepest teaching would be to just turn the camera onto this blank wall behind me with nothing. Do that for 2 hours. Obviously, it can turn into nihilism, and that is cautioned against as well. But you don't take it there. That's not the point. The point is the vibrancy behind all of this nothing that is terrifying. You want to latch onto concepts because it acts kind of like a limb on a tree that if you let go of, you're just in open space floating. And so maybe what this is kind of like there's an eagle, baby eagle, that hasn't left the nest yet, that's been yelling for its mom around here, usually come evening time. And my wife and I were talking about it, and I was thinking, at a certain age, the mom just lets the eagle figure out that it needs to exit the nest. Maybe there is decay or degeneration. Maybe the eagle shit in the nest too much and it's time to leave and fly. So it has to learn that it can use its own wings. I don't know what the heck I was talking about. I don't know how we got there. Maybe it's better not expanding on that. That's what I mean by poetry. You can't hand feed reality to people that are swimming in it like a fish in water. Like, what are we going to talk about? We're really going to talk about this and act like this is breaking it down? Not a damn thing can do that. It's going to be a good guide, but a horrible life partner. You know what I mean? In that it's gonna be like a mother bird kicking you out of the nest at some point. And it's sometimes helpful in that situation, like if you're feeling blind, to have kind of the tappy poles that they use to feel around. And maybe that's kind of what that is about. We are sensing into behind the veil, but that is not going to be defined by this. This isn't like a pointing at the moon. This is that. And yet at the same time, that isn't encapsulated into all that this is. That isn't possible, right? Our supporting hexagram, which is the hidden influence, puts our primary hexagram in a broader context and influence, a direction of travel, an underlying issue that has to do with you and your relationship to it all. I'm processing all this Dzogchen stuff and really looking into this and seeing how they compare, and it's causing me to slow down a little bit, but it's also very revealing. I love to be able to cross compare things. That's where I feel like a lot of really juicy stuff comes out. Weird way to put that. Hexagram 52, Jen, listen to the wind. The Oracle, quiet your heart and be calm. Remember that even stillness can be a form of movement. The sage contemplates the situation in stillness. It is natural for the heart to fluctuate and the mind to flutter, but exercise restraint or self-liberate. Listen to the wind. All things are self-liberating when you give them the space to do so, is the idea behind that you release attachment, and it's like the open hand, that eventually everything is subsumed in consciousness and reality. And so at a certain point, latching on to a teaching is silly. Latching on to your perspective of reality, even if it's a very scientific and an idea of quantum or any kind of perspective you can have, you're taking something infinite and you're trying to box it into something. And at a certain point, that's going to be restricting for you, right? The last reading was all about that, the restriction that what we want puts on us. It's all this wanting that we're enslaved to. Causes degeneration, I would think. Listen to the wind. That is how you will hear the answer to your inquiry. The wind will carry an important omen to you. Silence is the way to self-mastery. You show your strength to others when you sit tall like a mountain. Walk with the formidable presence of a mountain, all the while calm and serene. Think before you speak, which again, with what mind? The mind of Tao or the human mentality? Very important to distinguish between the right and left hemispheres of the brain. Look up bicameral mind theory by Julian Jaynes. Silence is the way to prevailing in your endeavor. Present inaction paves the way for future gains. Be still like a mountain. The sage moves without moving. The sage advances and evolves, is changing by standing still. Lying on the back, the body cannot move. Wandering into the courtyard, there is no movement. No irreparable harm comes. There is no blame. Matters have come to a standstill, no movement or action. That's because you're in movement and trying to take action. It is natural for the heart to fluctuate and a mind to flutter from thought to thought, especially in the aftermath of adversity. But exercise restraint and keep still. You will hear the answer to your inquiry by listening to the wind. Be still with your back straight in repose. When you are lost, do not wander. Remain still and a path will be cleared. In rest, there is movement. Hexagrams 51 and 52 are related. And that's what I think the Dzogchen path is permission to rest. It's a setting down. It's a dropping and releasing. And we need stories and payoffs and rewards to make this life palatable to the left hemisphere, wherein that is a world that doesn't truly exist. It's a fabric of our imagination. We've told so many stories about it that it appears to be what reality is. But a story is just that. Going into a story that it doesn't encapsulate all of reality in the words. It is a representation of that, or a co-emergent luminosity, you might say. And yet at the same time, you can get so sucked into a movie that you forget, what's going on outside of it. And that's the beauty of these tools is, man, they want to free you if you let them. You know what I mean? If you come at it with the logic only and that left hemisphere that needs answers, you're going to be disappointed because it's really, I think, pointing you to yourself. And that self doesn't have the kind of answers for you that you might think, I think. I come from a Christian background, so it reminds me of the still small voice, right? It's not going to be broadcast to you on a level that part of your mind is going to be able to comprehend or encapsulate. It's kind of like a releasing of your need to define something. Where are we at, man? You will hear the answer to your inquiry by listening to the wind. Be still with your back straight in repose. When you are lost, do not wander. Remain still and a path will be cleared. In rest, there is movement. Hexagrams 51 and 52 are related. After the quake of hexagram 51, thunder over thunder, chi changes into its inverse. Hexagram 52, mountain over mountain. Flip 51 upside down and you get 52, and vice versa. Hexagram 52 expresses the sentiment of seeking return to normalcy after a shock of circumstances. Can evoke pregnancy or rise in social status. The preceding ideogram is a neutral pronoun, which could mean his, her, its, their, that, or one. Thus, Bu Hiao Qi Shen is a prognostication that there will be no harvest, no manifestation or receiving of one's ideogram. I don't know what that is. Be that a figurative reference to pregnancy or social status, or to a certain corpus, a person's body or body of work. Finally, listening, as used in this context, is not about hearing, but about paying close attention and being attentive. Omen of the Quillin. The Quillin is a mythical beast that appears to portend a significant transformative event relating to a sage or leader. In the I Ching, hexagrams 2, 15, 23, and 52 are likened to the omen of seeing a Quillin appear. These hexagrams are omens of a significant transformative event to come, one relating to the near future rise of a sage or leader. Here, divining hexagram, you could look at that in such a beautiful way of looking at it as that rise of the sage or leader in all of us, a great unveiling of our true selves, you might say. That would be probably the most beautiful way I could ever read that. Here, divining hexagram 52 can portend a great awakening or epiphany, but one that is contingent upon the seeker heeding the counsel of hexagram 52's lines. Astral projection. In both Taoism and Buddhism, the mountain is often used as a metaphor for proper form in meditation. Dorje was just saying the Buddha is mostly just showing you form, like proper form, I think is what he meant in meditation. So that's funny that that came up. Thus, I interpret the lines lying on the back, the body cannot move, wandering into the courtyard, there is no movement, as the oracle offering instruction on astral projection. The lines are describing a mystical out-of-body experience. What's more, the progressing lines of the hexagram read like traditional step-by-step instructions for how to astrally project. When hexagram 52 comes up in divination by or for a Taoist mystic, bring the physical energy body to stillness to awaken the psychic or astral energy body. The oracle becomes the voice of a spirit messenger, announcing that an astral journey will take you to an ascended master or divinity who awaits with an important spiritual directive for you. Wow. Very, very interesting. Let's do Gnostic Book of Changes by James de Corn. Dude, I forgot to read The Secret. No. The changing lines on this again, like I did on the last one. Okay. The changing line puts a pin in the map to say you are here, or at least here some places you may find yourself. It's the most focused part of the reading. Takes precedence over all of the other elements. Changing line 2 has the general context, the heart's perception, the emotional center, where you make and feel connections. Y'all gotta call me out on that. Dropping the ball here. Let's see here. 18. Degeneration. Decay. Changing line 2. The mother's work is decaying. This is not an appropriate time for divination. The first line is often referred to as Fu Zi Gu, the decaying father, while the second line is the Mu Zi Gu, the decaying mother. At this time, the oracle is maintaining silence on the matter inquired about. Gotcha. Very descriptive. Helpful. It's like the pregnant void, right? Interesting thing about all that stuff is like plasma, understanding of plasma being potentially of a certain sentience, and that is 99.98 or 99% of the universe. So like swimming in consciousness, you know what I mean? And here we are like arguing about politics, about who's cooler than who, about who deserves what homage, who deserves to be able to eat, right? Or how take up space here. Kind of projects we want to make and support by any means necessary is just degeneration. Okay. James de Corn is a practitioner of the Tao himself. He has compiled several I Ching commentaries, English translated I Ching commentaries into one helpful place. Here, I've left links to it in the description box below. It's a PDF you could download, or you can follow along on your phone or whatnot and read with me. Just click the link and it'll take you to the right one. He calls our primary hexagram repair, 18 repair. Other titles might be work on what has been spoiled, the symbol of destruction, decay, arresting of decay, work after spoiling, fixing. Again, this was the very center card, and it's come up in another reading this year as well, probably 3 readings ago, I believe, in my year ahead spread of I Ching hexagrams. Meaning like the year revolves around work on what is decayed. So it being the primary hexagram, the other time it came up, I think it was the supporting hexagram. So that is also interesting. It's like taking front and center right now. And the very heart of the message is that the oracle isn't speaking. That it's not going to address the concern, whatever the question was. But we can definitely learn about the energy, if you want to call it that, or what the Tao is up to behind the scenes. Decay, arresting of decay, work after spoiling, fixing, rectifying, corrupting, branch, degeneration, misdeeds. A quote from D.F. Hook can refer to heredity and psychological traits. So a lot of this does feel like it has to do with like psychology and the spoiling of just too much stuff, jammed packed, that helps us categorize and be able to communicate and that kind of thing. But speaking is a very low level of communication. If you think about it, the majority of what comes across to people is like body language, that kind of thing, or demeanor, your attitude. All those things are expressed way more than the words that you use. So a further permission to rely less on needing to define things so heavily, and rely so heavily on that left hemisphere that there's just clashing going on. It's like, I imagine that game with the ping pong, Pong, isn't that what it was called? Going between the things, like how many barriers we have in our heads for concepts and little compartments, storage compartments. In the Tao Te Ching, it says, when you cut the whole into parts, the parts need names. There are already enough names. Judgment, leg. Successful progress is indicated for those who properly repair what has been spoiled. It is advantageous to cross the great stream. One should consider carefully the events 3 days before the turning point and the tasks remaining for 3 days afterward. Wilhelm/Baines, which the oracle isn't saying a word to us about, other than if you sense it. It's why words also, how could it? In anything, really, to a certain degree. It's like, how do I communicate to you in your own language something that you're swimming in? How do I get you to sense that swim without the need of a lifeline? Wilhelm/Baines, work on what has been spoiled. I want to be put out of a job, you know what I mean, with this. It'll be so nice to live in a world where this is just superfluous. Like, if you're living a thing, why do you need, instructions? You need a manual, right? To be who you are. It's like a deprogramming. So hopefully that's not always needed. I don't think there's any reason why it should be. I feel like we got trapped here in the left hemisphere and we're finding a way out, but it can be a painful process, or we can kind of surrender to that, I think. And I think that's the whole idea. If you are here in this massive, terrifying, dark, anything could be in those deep, dark waters of ancient, megalodon times. In China, the dragon is underwater. It's an underwater creature. They can also fly in the sky, I believe, but mostly they came from underwater. So that's like, makes me think dragon-like thoughts. When I think of you, I touch myself. I don't know why those two combined. I don't think of dragons and touch myself. Mostly, on most days. I gotta ring a thing for that. Good God. Wilhelm/Bain's work on what has been spoiled has supreme success. It furthers one to cross the great water. Before the starting point, 3 days. After the starting point, 3 days. But this is Buddha mind. This is the mind of Tao. Everything is that. Like, we're terrified of what, is terrifying naturally. And yet it's just as much Buddha mind or the mind of Tao as anything. And the stripping away of our needing to sort it all out, I think the idea really is to blend the two, so you don't have to absolutely get rid of the other. You can't just turn into a blob on the floor. But definitely, when we've swung so heavily to the extreme of the left hemisphere, in that bicameral mind theory, at one point we were more heavily on the right, is the idea. And then being kicked out of Eden was like going into the left. So, a return to our natural state, or at least maybe a merging of the two states, in which all this is appearing, it's also not resisting that appearance, maybe, that we need to be safe, so we fight. Right? If you're in the defense, you're gonna have a hard time, I think. And that's a lot of this is learning how to be safe in our world. So you need definitions and all that, but like a fish in water, how is it going to describe the water that it's swimming in? Wet, right? I don't know. How the fuck would it? Maybe when it gets pulled into a boat, it's like, oh shit, I was in water before. Wilhelm/Bain's work on what has been spoiled has supreme success. It furthers one to cross the great water. Before the starting point, 3 days. After the starting point, 3 days. Blofeld. Decay augurs sublime success and the advantage of crossing the great river or sea, i.e. of going on a journey or of going forward with one's plans. What has happened once will surely happen again, literally 3 days before the commencement, 3 days after the commencement. It would have been hard to make sense of these words were it not for that the Confucian commentary on the text clearly explains them, hence the liberty I have taken with the text. Lu. Work after spoiling, great success. It is of benefit to cross the great water. Before starting, 3 days. After starting, 3 days. This hexagram implies that although conditions are bad now, improvement can be expected. I just ring these right now. So good to hear, man. Could use it. We could all use a little bit of that. I'm going to take this moment to fill up my tea, listen to these gongs ring, talk amongst yourselves, get some popcorn, pour yourself a cup of tea, drink some tea with me. You don't have to be as weird as I am to do it, but you're absolutely welcome to. Alrighty. Rhythma/culture, corrupting, spring growing. Wait, did we read this? Nope. Harvesting, wading the great river, before seed burst 3 days, after seed burst 3 days. This hexagram describes your situation in terms of disorder, perversion, and putrefaction. It emphasizes that letting things rot away so they become obsolete is the adequate way to handle it. Stop picking them up. Don't pick up the stories. Sloughnessy. When you see that something's a story and it has a past or a future to it, that in essence is a story. So if you think about it in those terms, what part of you doesn't live within a story? Can you access that part that doesn't need to define its place in time or space? Maybe it could just relax the tension with life, right? Drop our guard. Cleary, it's like never been more important to collectively drop our guard, right? And yet, in most of our lives, it's never been this scary to do so. But sometimes that's how you, because maybe you don't have options, our backs are against the wall kind of feeling. And yeah, you realize that all the things that you grab onto to, be a happy, healthy human being are insufficient to stand against the weight of the world, so to speak. And yet it's largely, it's amazing if you really, really kind of think about it, how fast, due to, collective consciousness and how easily every communication occurs now, for a switch to flip, so to speak. And that switch isn't doing anything to reality. And that's the interesting thing. It's not really doing anything to you. It's more that your dependence on the left hemisphere relaxes, and over time you start swimming in that deeper water where it's safe to not know. Not knowing is half the battle. G.I. Joe. I bet you didn't think that was coming when I was pausing so long. It's gonna be super profound. How is that not profound? How am I not myself? Anybody who's seen I Heart Huckabees? God, that's such a great movie. That's about perspectives of the cosmos and stuff like that. I can't remember what it's called. Not necessary. You get it. Watch the movie. It's really great. Cleary, correcting degeneration is clearly developmental. It is beneficial to cross great rivers. 3 days before the start, 3 days after the start. The way to correct degeneracy is not in empty tranquility without action. It is necessary to work in the midst of great danger and difficulty, to act in the dragon's pool and the tiger's lair. God, we were just talking about dragons, bringing up this cool megalodon tooth thing I'm so excited about, so terrifying. Can you imagine the size of the animal this thing had to come out of? And if you got that close to it when it was living, it would be the last thing you saw, you know that. Yes, I am truly this dorky in person. Cleary 1, correcting degeneration is greatly developmental. It is beneficial to cross great rivers, 3 days before the start, 3 days after the start. The way to correct degeneracy is not in empty tranquility without action. It is necessary to work in the midst of great danger and difficulty, to act in the dragon's pool and the tiger's lair. Only then can one restore one's original being, cultivating it into something indestructible. As the other thing, I wouldn't probably hear cultivation in Dzogchen, because it's like the opposite of that, right? It's clearing out. And also, this is a translation from Thomas Cleary, so I'm not sure what it says. I don't speak Chinese. I don't know what it says originally, or all the kind of tonations to it. But clearly, in like a co-emergent luminosities, that it's all part of it, even though it can be something that we trip up on and think we have an answer, really, right? That we understand. Woo, misdeeds is great and pervasive. It will be advantageous to cross the big river. It would be advisable to begin an undertaking 3 days before Jia and examine the ongoing progress 3 days thereafter. The image, leg. The image of wind below the mountain forms repair. The superior man, in accordance with this, stimulates the virtue of the people. Wilhelm/Baines, the wind blows low on the mountain, the image of decay. Thus, the superior man stirs up the people and strengthens their spirit. Blofeld, this hexagram symbolizes wind blowing at the foot of a mountain. The superior man, by stimulating people's hearts, nourishes their virtue. Lu, wind blowing around the foot of the mountain symbolizes work after spoiling. The superior man encourages people to cultivate virtue. Ritsuma/Karcher, below mountain possessing wind, corrupting. The Chunsu, or chief son or superior person, uses rousing the commoners to nurture actualizing Tao. Actualized Tao is the ability to follow the course traced by the ongoing process of the cosmos, linked with acquire. D, acquiring that which makes a being become what it is meant to be, that it already is. Clary 1, there is wind in the mountains, degeneration. Thus superior people rouse the people and nurture virtue. It's like a clearing away to see the Buddha mind or the mind of Tao. You gotta like get off the red dust of society, which really has molded that left hemisphere into what it is now, which becomes a trap. And the older you live, the more traps you realize you're ricocheting back and forth in. And you can really, really develop into quite a bitter human being, or just miserable, individual, so to speak, which really isn't as necessary. I mean, at a certain point, it becomes too much to carry all that load, and you got to put it somewhere. You might as well just drop it. Woo, there is wind at the foot of the mountain. This is misdeeds. Thus, the Chun-Si arouses the people and nurtures his own virtue. Commentary, Confucius/Leg. The dynamic trigram is above, and the magnetic trigram is below. Pliancy is below and stopping above. These suggest troubled conditions verging on ruin. But repair brings order to all under heaven, and he who advances will encounter the business to be done. The end of confusion is the beginning of order. Such is the procedure of heaven. Leg. Repair means the performance of painful but necessary duties. It shows a situation in which things are going to ruin, as if through poison or venomous worms. In order to justify the auspice of progress and success, the duty of the figure is to rectify this and restore conditions to health. This will require a major effort, such as crossing the great stream, and the careful differentiation of the causes of the problem, as well as the measures taken to fix it. The attribute of the lower trigram is pliancy. When the fixing it happens through something that usually takes the lead in fixing things, that's the confusion. That's the disconnect. That we think we know how to fix things, but like, how do you unfix the fixing that doesn't fix anything? I'm gonna write a children's book. The attribute of the lower trigram is pliancy, and the upper represents stoppage or arrest. Hence, the feeble pliancy of decadence is stopped cold by the immovable mountain. The 3 days before and after, did we start in mountain before we fucking? No? Oh, that's the trigram they're talking about. Sorry. Thought we were in the wrong hexagram. Yeah. By the immovable mountain, the feeble pliancy of decadence is stopped cold by the immovable mountain. The 3 days before and after the turning point symbolize the careful attention and differentiation necessary for any rectification to succeed. On the image, Chang Tzu says, when the wind encounters the mountain, it is driven back, and the things about are all scattered in disorder. Such is the emblem of the state denoted by repair. The nourishing of virtue appears especially in line 6. All the other lines belong to the helping of the people. Notes and paraphrases, judgment. Repair means to set your house in order. Analyze your choices before the renovation and evaluate their consequences afterward. The superior man orders his thoughts and feelings, reforms old attitudes, and strengthens his will. Psychologically, to stimulate the virtue of the people, leg, is to rectify the components of a complex. Will has a completely different meaning when you think about the effort it takes to do so much pretending. And if you want to put it in terms of will, it's almost like the will to set that down and not pick it back up again. I mean, that's kind of like the will. It's more relaxing. And like our supporting hexagram, like a mountain, staying in one place and silent, that kind of thing. It's the work to be done to free from, the thought that work is even something that our existing requires a participation so heavily of our left hemisphere that it just thinks it knows better and takes over and says, oh, I already know. And you're like, what the fuck are we building? And meanwhile, you like have some crazy contraption, and that it also creates karma, that kind of an idea. You're just basically swinging the pendulum violently versus trying to come to some sort of steady balance. But, you know, you got to put things into words somehow, and, you know, you got to see through those words when it's time to see through them as well. The superior man orders his thoughts and feelings, reforms old attitudes, and strengthens his will. To imagine any truly objective state of perception, we must include all that exists. Here we go. The entire cosmos. Each differentiation of this, when you cut the whole into parts, the parts need names. There are already enough names. From atom to galaxy is one slice out of an infinite whole. As a portion of the entirety, we are always linked with our ancestors, co-emergent luminosities. Our ancestors in an infinite web of relationships, which includes our family history, our racial, cultural, historical heritage, and Homo sapiens as a species. Though seldom aware of them, it is useful to remember these links. Emanating from an unfathomable complexity, their karmically charged morphogenetic fields are constantly shaping our lives. It follows that although we perceive ourselves as separate from our ancestors, the separation is a subjective experience which is true only in a temporally limited sense. Every line of repair, except 2 and 6, shows a son dealing with the troubles caused by his father. This reminds us of the biblical curse. Exodus 20, verse 5, "For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the 3rd and 4th generation of them that hate me." The father archetype has a wide range of meanings. I wonder if time, temporality, I mean, maybe we cling so much. If everything is mind and we influence it in where we direct our sight or our gaze, so to speak, I wonder if we're limiting ourselves in terms of needing to perceive so heavily through time, which is something that's interesting to say, but really, if you think about it, the difference between different hearing levels, smelling levels of different species, dogs, for instance, that can smell, you know, so much better than humans, or things that can see different rays of light, or I don't remember how can't recall how you would say grades of light, whatever. But we're limited in that and those things, and yet there's so much reality to experience, and we take the tools we've been given and we think, you know, we're using them correctly and at their highest capacity, when really we might literally be so scared of existing, you know, in our natural state, so to speak, that we don't realize even how to use the utensils correctly, and what that could, or maybe not correctly, but in their natural state, how the inhibitor chip taken out. And so how might we experience reality if genuinely a switch were thrown and in a moment there was like the idea of the rapture, but if you think of it in terms of like all of a sudden through collective consciousness or on some sort of scale, there were to be something like that where you break out of your shells, you know, kind of like on a pretty wide scale. At a certain point, it's going to tip the balance, because the idea of anything else being in comparison to someone's natural state that's already so much superior to the limits that we put on ourselves in order to protect ourselves and give definition to the world that we live in, that really is, all of this is kind of living us, if we really want to think about it. We're being lived, And the part of us that is so identified with the body that this experience seems to be occurring to just in a kind of like a very limited sense, everything is scary. That's terrifying. But being locked in a cage, being too scared to leave it, is sad. I guess it too is, Buddha mind. But it would be nicer to see truly rather than, being too afraid to open our eyes or, whatever. Scales fall from our eyes, that Thrice song makes me think of that. The father archetype has a wide range of meanings. This extends from the primal spirit, God the Father, to a prior cause or intent in the psyche which has engendered a present condition. Psychologically interpreted, it is this later reading which usually applies, or latter reading. If a father symbolizes the cause, then a son is the effect. If the effect is imperfect, then to rectify it is also to rectify the original intent. To a large extent, our lives consist of well-intentioned but misguided choices which create less than perfect consequences. To modify our attitude or behavior so that it corrects errors in our original intent is to deal with the troubles caused by the father. An interesting perspective on this, there's a magician guy that I listened to some audiobooks by. I think he calls himself Merlin, in fact. Maybe. But this guy, he came up with methods to draw like a circle around himself, right? Kind of like a Akashic circle or something like that. And he kept developing tools, and he did these practices so much that it was just second nature to him. But he would have a furnace behind him, and he would dissect things. He would pull a holographic image out of himself and put it in front of him and find things and, throw them out into the furnace. And then he had ideas of how to imagine energy flowing through your body and things like that. And then the other one that I think is incredibly cool is the idea of other people coming to him to have help with like a really long-term issue. And he can ask, well, when did this occur? And they'll give the story, and he'll pull out of them, and this is all imaginary, but right, if this is all mind that we're swimming in, this isn't the craziest idea. You're imagining pulling a hologram out. You don't even have to have the person with you, and obviously you would need their permission to do shit like this. But and then you take a timeline off of them and lift it up. You don't, I think, have to have the hologram for the timeline thing, but you swipe it back all the way to the point where it happened, and you take specifically the thing that their issue is about. You don't, obviously, I don't think, want to restart the whole human, but I mean, that's what this work is to do, reset you back to factory settings. So maybe it's as simple as that. If everyone sat here and imagined swiping back on a timeline and taking all their conditioning, so to speak, if it's this idea of degeneration or spoilage, or work on what has been spoiled, take a nice little imaginative timeline journey in this magic school bus with me, and we'll go back in time to before all of this conditioning, and at the very least we can release attachment from it. So we swipe back to Buddha mind, back to the mind of Tao, natural state, right? Just reality. And come back, and all the conditioning that we want to detach from, grab a hold of the roots of that, pull it out of that spot, or you can create a different timeline altogether that whoops up and over it, run it over, boom, set it, clip it back into place. And I did this imagination on my lower back, and it has been helpful. But, the amount that you pay homage to something and you treat it as sacred is the amount of sacredness usually that you get out of it. So that would lend a certain amount of potency, and the habitual practice of such things, I think, builds in your subconscious, or your ability to believe what you're doing, you know? And we could really use a good start over, so to speak. The sight of the Quillin, for instance, the awakening or the emerging of a great sage or leader within us all. The idea of, wouldn't it be great if literally there was no need for a leader of any kind, because literally humanity became what they always were without the need of all this extra curricular activities, you might say. I hope you follow me. Lighting another Durga incense here. Smells like roses. Come on, man. All right. We only have one changing line, so hopefully all this talking leads to eventual conclusion of this reading. To a large extent, yeah, we talked about that. Okay. To modify our attitude or behavior so that it corrects errors in our original intent is to deal with the troubles caused by the father. For example, in a misconceived expression of affection, a parent allows his child unrestricted access to candy. As a consequence of this choice, the kid's teeth become rotten, and the only logical way to correct the original error is to now curtail his intake of sugar. This would be something, too, that the things that we get hung up on, really in the light of consciousness and reality, those are self-liberating. So this is an example of really getting to the root, too, I think, of something that means that you don't have to just put out fires all day, right? And I was just constantly running around putting out fires that your left hemisphere is creating, because truly what we're existing in is a miraculous. The fact that anything exists whatsoever is mind-boggling, to the point of feeling like you could go crazy if you really, really saw it for what it is. And so we hide behind definitions to protect ourselves from strays. Or, I mean, you can't even describe what it is. So it's like terrifying to that side that that's its function, right? Is to define and to protect and, structure. But the idea is to merge them. So you do have to get out of your element a little bit and start swimming in the deep end, or like the eagle in the nest. A certain amount of just cawing and cawing and cawing for mom to come back home isn't going to be as helpful as learning to take flight. That's what you were born to do, essentially. And you have the wings for it, and the wind is available, and you're at a height. It's just terrifying to step off the edge. The fact that this new choice will create stress in the relationship between parent and child is just a consequence of the original choice and has no bearing at all on what is correct in the situation. In some situation, this hexagram may be interpreted as a response to a karmic chain of cause and effect. Quote from Erlang Cheney in The Mystery of Death and Dying. To harmonize with the wisdom teachings, the scripture should read that the karma of the father is visited upon the child. They do this for father and this for child, unto the fourth incarnation, not generation. The mistakes you made in the last 4 incarnations may be visited upon you in the form of karma, flowing out of the heart seed Adam in the present incarnation. Thus, what you fathered or created in your last incarnation may be the source or parent of your karma today. You are a child of that parent today. You have inherited from that parent the you of the past, not your physical parents, all of your characteristics, weaknesses, and strengths. The interpretation of any oracle response can only be as profound as our minds are prepared to accept. As moderns, we find it difficult to emphasize with ancestor worship, yet properly understood, it can provide useful insights into the work, or the unwork, you might say. In the unconscious realm, all time is immediate. The great dropping. Sounds like a giant bird pooped. Right on your car windshield. In the unconscious realm, all time is immediate, not sequential, and the objective psyche consists of a non-temporal web of forces shading from personal to universal. This means that if we have a complex engendered in us by our father, for example, we can reasonably assume that he was passing on what he received from his own parents. In this way, the unresolved complexes of the ancestors shape our own personalities. They live in and through us right now, even if they had their birth in forefathers long forgotten. This is a kind of near immortality. Individuals may die, but beliefs, attitudes, complexes live as long as they have receptive vessels to inhabit. This is probably the engine of karma. To the extent that an ancestral chain of causality still motivates our choices, we are totally responsible for setting right what was spoiled by the father. Suggestions for meditation. Most people have some level of unfinished business with their parents. Psychologists would have little to do if this weren't true. It can be a healing ritual to set up an altar to a deceased parent and meditate there on the stresses that still remain between you. To approach the situation without judgment, to realize non-logically that forces pre-existing non-logically. Said it. That forces pre-existing you provoke the condition as much as your parent did, will elicit much insight. Be especially aware of the presence of the past and the illusion of linear time. Is it possible somehow to be your own great-grandfather? I'm my own grandpa. Ancestor worship of this sort can be profoundly therapeutic. Yeah, this is all you. This is all happening within you. The great you. The great I am, right? That idea. Aham. Our supporting hexagram, which puts our primary hexagram in a broader context and influence, a direction of travel, an underlying issue that has to do with you and your relationship to it all. Hexagram 52, James Acorn calls keeping still. Other titles might be mountain, keeping still, the symbol of checking and stopping, desisting, stilling, stillness, stoppage, bound, reposing, resting, meditation. Makes me think of the Four of Swords card in the tarot. Non-action, stopping, arresting movement. Quote from D.F. Hook, refers to meditation and yoga. Judgment, leg. When his repose is like the back and he loses all consciousness of self. Benabel Wen brought out a thing thinking that the advancement of the changing lines were stages in astral projection, which is really interesting. So maybe think about that in context of this. I'm not sure where she gets that, but that's really incredible. When his repose is like the back and he loses, these aren't the changing lines, however, so obviously. And he loses all consciousness of self. When he walks in his courtyard and does not see the people, there will be no error. Clearing out the baggage out of, our psyche. And it can be instantaneous. It also can be gradual. I imagine it's easier to handle on a gradual basis. But I mean, how much do we really need all this baggage? Is it causing us to be able to continue swimming, or are we drowning with this shit? Wilhelm/Baines, keeping still, keeping his back still so that he no longer feels his body. He goes into his courtyard and does not see his people. No blame. Blofeld, keeping the back so still as to seem virtually bodiless, or walking in the courtyard without noticing the people, there involves no error. Lu, stillness, keeping the back still, one feels that the body no longer exists. Even when one walks in the courtyard, one sees no people. No blame. Ritzema/Karcher, bound. One's back, not catching one's individuality, moving one's chambers, not visualizing one's people without fault. This hexagram describes your situation in terms of confronting a boundary or obstacle. It emphasizes that stopping and acknowledging the limit, the action of bound, is the adequate way to handle it. To be in accord with the time, you are told to stop. In the analogy I was using of bouncing pong off of little walls, like that being the idea of these areas in our psyche that are like walls that our thoughts are just rebounding off of. Maybe we accept that for a time, that maybe they are self-liberating, so a forceful liberation just causes, the waves in the ocean in the opposite direction, right? It's still creating karma, that idea. So it does have to be self-liberating, honestly, in the end, because how are you ever gonna if your natural state is effortless, how are you going to get there through effort? That's kind of the interesting thing that all of this is. And I think it's even talked about in that, yes, it's an effortless state, but there's a certain amount of effort that goes into the seeing of that. But it doesn't have to be that. It's more of like the will to release than it is the will to take up, tools and go to work. It's like the dropping of all the tools you thought that you could use in order to come up with some sort of thing. It's like not thinking that you know better or that you know anything, really. You're relying on a language that was developed before you that you had nothing to do with. You were spat out here. You learned the rules of the game, so to speak, but you're smart enough to know that it's a game. So that game can only continue as long as there are people willing to play it. And the unhooking from that cable, I think of Matrix, where they're, pull the fucking stem out of the back of your head. That unhook is going to be something that each person comes to that space on their own. And I wouldn't advise anybody, to do any particular thing because I'm not in anybody's particular situation. But to know that that's, you don't want to put too much of an image to it either, but to a degree, it's kind of like you've got your hand just by being here and, having the attention to make it this far into a video, reading this kind of stuff that's liberating language, albeit packaged in a circle, like a hexagram. You could draw a hexagram in a circle, right? With all these changes going on. Knowing that it's in housing the idea of trying to encapsulate reality in a circle. The Smith diagram on electronics, look at that. There was a video on that, I'll link in the description box below, that is incredible. They found a way to, on a graph, basically put a circle around infinity. And that's what I'm saying. You got, and this isn't, the be all end all. There's not that. That's not, you're using human language and the left hemisphere to try and draw a circle around infinity. And you can kind of interact with it on that level as long as the circle, connects. And that you're, in housing more of an accurate, all-encompassing vision of reality that isn't dualistic at the very least. But even the way we handle non-duality is often so incredibly dualistic. It's dualistic if you want to think about it, to even describe it in terms of like separate hexagrams. But, you gotta like walk backwards and erase your path through the forest. Something like that. You were told to stop. Slothnacy, stilling his back but not stilling his body, walking into his courtyard but not seeing his person. There is no trouble. Clary 1, stopping at the back, one does not have a body. Walking in the garden, one does not see a person. No fault. Wu, stoppage indicates that resting on his back, he does not find his body, and walking in his courtyard, he does not see any person. Faultless. The image. Leg, the image of one mountain atop another forms keeping still. The superior man, in accordance with this, does not allow his thoughts to go beyond the duties of his immediate circumstances. Wilhelm / Baines, the whole 3 days before the start, 3 days after the start. That's like, I mean, if you can center in that and be in the moment, that would be keeping your mind, not letting your thoughts go beyond the duties of his immediate circumstances, being literally step by step with your path. That was important in the last reading. In Changing Line 1, it was getting out of the carriage and walking, which meant that you were going to be there for every step of the journey. And if you can't see very far ahead, because Changing Line here says the Oracle is not answering any of our inquiries right now, what's behind the scenes? What's behind all the scenes? You can imagine if reality truly is we're all swimming in consciousness, and what we used to think was empty space is now filled with plasma, and that may be more sentient than we are, realistically. And we think that we're kind of like the pinnacle of, quote unquote creation. The last reading talked about humility. I mean, what's more humbling than seeing reality as is without the blinders on? That's that's like why people do drugs, is to be confronted with that, and it's not always anything like you would imagine going in, right? Mushrooms, for instance, that's the only hallucinogen that I've taken. I would like to try ayahuasca. I've always wanted to do that. If anybody's tried ayahuasca, literally tell me anything about it, like where to get it. I wonder if my whole reading's gonna get flagged now from saying that. Wilhelm/Baines, mountains standing close together, the image of keeping still. It would be cool to do it in the actual proper setting, though. Obviously, it's not something you necessarily want to not have the correct set and setting for, by golly. Thus, the superior man, Terence McKenna said that he would take heroic dosages of mushrooms and go into a dark room by himself. Terrifying. Anyway, thus the superior man does not permit his thoughts to go beyond his situation. Blowfold. This hexagram symbolizes two mountains conjoined. The superior man takes thought in order to avoid having to move from his position. Lu. Mountain next to mountain symbolizes stillness. The superior man's thoughts do not go beyond his position. Ritsuma/Karcher, joined mountains, bound. A Chunsu or chief son or superior person uses pondering not to issue forth from one's situation. Cleary, joining mountains, thus do superior people think without leaving their place. Cleary 2, the mountains are still, thus the thoughts of developed people are not out of place. Wu, one mountain overlapping another makes stoppage, thus the Chunsi does not contemplate things beyond his position. Confucius said, if you do not hold an office, do not give counsels on its administration. What he meant is not to volunteer counsels freely. On the other hand, if you are requested, then give the best you can. I will say that I definitely come at this with my own limited perspective. And so you are free to gather conclusions out of this that are not things that I'm gathering, obviously. And you're absolutely welcome to reject any of the conclusions I'm gathering out of this. Knowing that there's going to be a limitation on any of the perspectives we have, as well as this isn't talking about reality. You know what I mean? These words, they're, maybe a finger pointing at the moon, but they're not going to be able to allow somebody, or a permission slip. What is that, right? It's maybe a permission slip. Like, it's a great one, but you got to get your ass on the bus. Get in, bitches. We're going with Mrs. Frizzle on the Magic School Bus back before mundane consciousness or human consciousness took charge of affairs. Confucius/Leg, keeping still means stopping. One rests when it is time to rest, and acts when it is time to act. When action and rest occur at the proper times, one's behavior is enlightened. Keeping his back still, he rests in his proper place. The upper and lower lines of the hexagram all mirror each other, but are without any interaction. Hence it is said, that he has no consciousness of ego. He does not see the persons in his courtyard, and there will be no error. Ego is in brackets, by the way, so that's editor's, I believe, emphasis. Leg, or insertion. Leg 2 trigrams, weird to just shout out insertion. Leg 2 trigrams symbolizing mountain make up the hexagram of keeping still. Mountains rise up grandly from the surface of the earth, their huge masses resting on it in quiet and solemn majesty. They are barriers to the onward progress of the traveler. The attributes of this hexagram are both resting and arresting. It denotes the characteristic of resting in what is right in principle, right in the widest possible scale, in the absolute conception of the mind, and in every possible position in which a man can be placed. As in hexagram number 31, initiative, the symbolism is taken from the different parts of the human body. According to the Confucian editors, the second sentence in the image should be translated, the superior man, in consequence with this, thinks anxiously how he shall not go beyond the duties of his position. Notes and paraphrases, judgment. Wipe out imagination, check desire, extinguish appetite, keep the ruling faculty in its own power. Marcus Aurelius. The superior man eliminates all distraction and concentrates on the matter at hand. A large portion of the work consists of nothing more than the will to keep still. Anyone who has ever tried it can attest that keeping still or doing nothing is probably the most difficult thing that a human can be asked to do. We are an ever-flowing fountain of restless desire. The senses are mindlessly programmed to encounter with their objects, and when we prevent them from doing this, a great commotion occurs in the psyche. We are so accustomed to feeling our desires, drives, instincts, and appetites as integral to our awareness that we are seldom conscious of the fact that they are actually autonomous forces, as separate from the ego or choice-making complex as we are from other people, creatures or objects in the physical world, which, co-emergent luminosities. Try controlling an ingrained habit such as smoking and observe how difficult it is to impose your will upon it. Who controls whom? A quote from Paracelsus in De Viribus Membrorum makes me think of deploris unum, or whatever's on the dollar. E pluribus unum. I don't know what that means. It sounds Latin. The power of sight does not come from the eye. The power to hear does not come from the ear, nor the power to feel from the nerves. But it is the spirit of man that sees through the eye and hears with the ear and feels by means of the nerves. Wisdom and reason and thought are not contained in the brain, but they belong to the invisible and universal spirit, which feels through the heart and thinks by means of the brain. This body is a tool of consciousness in order to experience itself from the inside, right? Something. This is all Buddha mind. We're swimming in it. And we're fish that don't understand what water is. All these powers are contained in the invisible universe and become manifest through material organs, and the material organs are their representatives and modify their mode of manifestation according to their material construction. Because a perfect manifestation of power can only take place in a perfectly constructed organ, and if the organ is faulty, the manifestation will be imperfect. But not the original power defective. I have to ring these after that. I'm not done though. Oh, this is really great. The ego has only one legitimate function, to make choices. It is the switchboard in the psyche which directs where the energy of the instinctual powers shall go. We were talking about a switch. If a switch could be flipped, in the collective unconscious by all of us, to drop our load, so to speak. Share the load, don't share it, just drop it. Let's not create more karma. The ego has only one legitimate function, to make choices. It is the switchboard in the psyche which directs where the energy of the instinctual powers shall go. If these autonomous forces are stronger than the will of the ego, they soon learn to get their way as often as possible. The main difference between an inferior and a superior man is that the latter has learned to control and direct his energies for a higher purpose. One of the best ways to acquire this ability is to learn the lessons inherent within keeping still. A quote from Roberto Assagioli in Psychosynthesis. Psychoanalysis has demonstrated that the power of these images and complexes lies chiefly in the fact that we are unconscious of them, that we do not recognize them as such. When they are unmasked, understood, and resolved into their elements, they often cease to obsess us when they self-liberate. In any case, we are then much better able to defend ourselves against them, or just not, have any reaction. Doesn't have to take resistance. The idea is to drop resistance. The lines of the upper and lower trigrams are mirror images of each other, yet not one of them. Stop resisting reality or life. That's what Brian Brown Walker said in 2 readings ago. The lines of the upper and lower trigrams are mirror images of each other, yet not one of them has a proper correlate. They don't connect with each other. This suggests the separation of the senses from their objects. For example, eyeballs are sensory receptors designed for the perception of light and form. Close your eyes and they are prevented from contracting the phenomena they were created to perceive. That the psychic entities attached to this desire to perceive phenomena might resist restriction is a foregone conclusion, but the ego has control over the eyelids, or should have. Not seeing the people in one's own courtyard means that one ignores one's autonomous impulses. Regulation of the psyche's autonomous manifestations in accordance with the will of the self is the purpose of gaining a controlling influence over one's karma. I will say that the language in this is very left hemisphere, and it's almost like the idea is to create a resistance to coincide with another resistance. And so I do want to bring that out because what you resist persists. And if you're able to drop stories altogether, even good ones that you like hearing, if you can kind of release your attachment and just be here for what's happening, it's almost like instead of walking around with your phone in your hand, you're actually in reality, or walking around with a bunch of stored photo albums, for instance, that you pore over, and in the meantime your children are growing up and you're not present for all the just the moments. But also, on a deeper level, like, you are the one that exists in your body, right? And that is something that should be honored to the point where you want to give yourself the opportunity to be with your time and with each moment. So we're not just rushing ahead and running away, in a sense, or running to. It's like, how do we dwell with? Like, be like the mountain and stay still. Our supporting hexagram. Hopefully all of this is helpful, or some of it. I'm definitely interrupting the reading often, but a lot of stuff is like ping, ping, pinging. Regulation of the psyche's autonomous manifestations. Okay, yeah, we read that. As stated herein many times, you, as ego, are nothing more than a tool created by the self for the direction of its own destiny. That's a really kind of like negative way to look at it. I mean, and also it doesn't seem like it's accurate as much as the idea of co-emergent luminosity. If this is all Buddha mind, then there's no reason for Buddha to resist a Buddha, so to speak. It's kind of like really trying to come at it through that left hemisphere. Quote from Robert Svoboda in Agora 3, The Law of Karma. Both karma theory and quantum mechanics refuse to accept that observers can exist independent of the systems they observe. That might be very interesting and related to the idea of, having no choice in the matter or whatever. The self, if we're talking about, the Tao or the mind of Tao, it knows better. But we're not also enslaved by it. I wouldn't say. I would say that there's kind of that converging of the mind of Tao and the human mentality, that you want to bridge those two and have them. So yeah, I think it is kind of a mutual or a co-emergent luminosity in that respect as well. If you want to divide it in that way, in which it's really dividing the whole into parts, but there are already enough names. Spiritual science goes so far as to take the observer's own internal universe and its states as its experimental field. For it is within that field that karma is produced and stored. The matter from which we and our obstructions are created includes both the dense physical material from which our bodies are built and the thoughts, attitudes, and emotions that make up our minds. Tantric practice is karmic engineering within this field of name and form, orchestration of substance and action into result. First, you direct new causes against previous effects to nullify adverse influences on your awareness. Then you unleash yet further actions to negate the influence of the nullifying actions. So that sounds very violent too. There's like violent ways to go about liberation that I think it's probably way easier to just turn non-duality into duality in that sense. Kind of like really resisting on both sides in that. You're like fighting the ping pong battle. Whereas, maybe really that's the battle of trying to drop the battle. If you want to talk about the will, it's really the battle to stop battling, which is an unbattling. How any ego could tackle such responsibilities with any hope of progress is impossible to imagine without the direction of the self. Keeping still certainly has its own karmic consequences, but when the not choosing implied in this hexagram is done in accordance with the self's will and intent, the results slowly lead to ever higher levels of awareness, eventually into realms beyond the physical. That is what the work is all about. Any other choice is to lock ourselves into a continuous round of birth and death in physical manifestation. A quote from Rabbi David Cooper in God as a Verb: "The Kabbalists teach that everything we do stirs up a corresponding energy in other realms of reality. Actions, words, or thoughts set up reverberations in the universe. The universe unfolds from moment to moment as a function of all the variables leading up to that moment. When we remain cognizant of this mystical system, we are careful about what we do, say, or even think, for we know that everything is interdependent. We know that a seemingly insignificant gesture could have weighty consequences." Suggestions for meditation. Notice that that's also one of the reasons it can be incredibly terrifying. And maybe that's what it is people are more scared of the responsibility coming with the power that they yield. Spider-Man's coming out today, right? With great power comes great responsibility. And we all wield great power. And we might be too terrified of what that means in terms of responsibility. And, the whole what's been spoiled, right? You're looking at it, that we're standing in it, we're swimming in it, and yet it in itself isn't affected at all. It's not putrefied, but our refusal to see it as is gives us a hard time. That's for damn sure. But if we can let that go, it can be self-liberating, right? Suggestions for meditation. Notice that every line of this hexagram except the last deals with an inherent challenge involved in the discipline required to keep still. Compare the lines in keeping still with similar lines in hexagram 31, initiative. On to our changing line 2, which puts a pin in the map to say you are here, or at least here some places you may find yourself. They take precedence over all other elements and are the most focused part of the reading. Changing line 2 has the general context, the heart's perception, the emotional center where you make and feel connections. Hexagram 18, degeneration or repair. Changing line 2. Leg. The second line dynamic shows a son dealing with the troubles caused by his mother. He should not carry his firm correctness to the utmost. Wilhelm/Baines, setting right what has been spoiled by the mother, one must not be too persevering. Blofeld, assuming responsibility for the mistakes of our mothers cannot be too serious. Liu, in correcting the mistakes of the mother, one must not be too persistent. Ritzimo/Karcher, managing the mother's corrupting, not permitting trial. Slofnacy, the stem mother's branch, one may not determine. Cleary, 1. Correcting the degeneracy of the mother, it is improper to be righteous. Wu, he attends to the affairs of his mother, he should not be insistent. Commentary, Confucius/Leg. You know, I want to say, because it came up and maybe it's important in some way, but it's a story of mine where I was at my mother's funeral, and before any of the other guests showed up, the pastor that was doing the proceedings and, managing them asked if I wanted to do the eulogy. And then when I started talking about what I would say, he basically said he would do it, right? And I think I was reading from something I'd written the night before, but it had a very kind of negative flavor to it to a degree. And he cut me off. And in the end, at the time, I felt like I needed to get shit off my chest, but obviously there's a time and place, right? You don't necessarily go, air out all your dirty laundry or unsettled issues, which it wasn't what it totally was, but there was at least the flavor of that in there. The bitterness is not a time to dump that right after somebody dies on everybody. In fact, I've heard stories of people doing that, and I'm so glad I didn't do that, especially my own mom, right? And attitudes change, but that's what that makes me think of. Like, you don't, there's Eastern traditions, the family, you gotta have like a lot more respect for it, obviously, than in the West we even remotely approach things with. Confucius/Leg, in dealing with the troubles caused by his mother, he holds to the course of the due mean. Wilhelm/Baines, he finds the middle way. Blowfold, at best, a middle course is advisable. Ritzema/Karcher, acquiring, centering, Tao indeed. Cleary 2, attaining balance. Wu, he proceeds with moderation. Leg. The fifth line ruler is magnetic, while line 2 is dynamic. Thus the symbolism takes the form of a son dealing with the prevailing decay induced by his mother. But a son must be very gentle in all his dealings with his mother, and especially so when constrained by a sense of duty to oppose her course. Notes and paraphrases Sue. The man, I work with my mother now in my path. She's right here. And I've actually smoked a little bit of her ashes with my weed. So there's another reason to be flagged. I don't know what flags you and what doesn't. I played a song one time and that got flagged. So here we are. Sue, the man is gentle and yep. Wait, we didn't read this one. Sue, the man is gentle in dealing with his mother, even when duty bound to oppose her. Because we all want our ashes smoked by our children when we die, right? It's like the highest ideal, the highest honor. Please smoke me in your bong. When I go, that's my one request. If I could have one thing, how do you want to go? If everyone could just smoke me, smoke me out. The man is gentle in dealing with his mother, even when duty bound to oppose her. When restoring what has been spoiled by weakness, gradualness is required. Wing, you've become aware of past mistakes that must be rectified. Here, you must proceed with great sensitivity, since the changes in your life could hurt those dear to you. Editor, in psychological symbolism, the stopping in our supporting hexagram, it's like honoring the walls for a moment, right? To let them self-liberate. Maybe there's a concern here about forcing something that is potentially dangerous, for one, and two, if we remain in the position of the mountain, it's kind of like it kind of resolves around the stillness. So highly would recommend meditation. In fact, in Hexagram 52 Mountain, one of the titles for it, James DeCorn says, could be meditation or yoga. And it reminds me of the Four of Wands in the tarot. So that really kind of highlights that for me when it comes up like this in the changing line as well. That's really, really emphasized. Editor, in psychological symbolism, a female represents emotional or feeling components within the psyche. A mother, then, would be the source of an emotional attitude which, in the context of this hexagram, needs to be modified or changed. In correcting outmoded or inappropriate feelings, one must proceed with care because emotional/instinctual forces cannot be altered as quickly as we can change our minds. It is a commonplace in psychology that mental insights mean nothing if the emotions involved refuse to conform. Often the line can refer to the proper way of responding to another's sensitive mood or attitude. A quote from Gareth Knight in A History of White Magic. As in childhood development, which recapitulates human historical development in consciousness, the psychic detachment from the mother towards the father is intimately bound up with the growth of individuality. Consciousness strives to become separate from the maternal involvement and aspires toward the outside world represented by the father. James DeCorn breaks changing line 2 into two succinct definitions, A and B. A, rectify an emotional response. Control your feelings, but don't crush them. And B, be sensitive in the way you handle an emotional situation. It makes me feel emotional just thinking about it. And with yourselves, be gentle with yourselves. Okay, that was the changing line. So next is the Taoist I Ching by I-ming. Put some alchemical flavors on here. Our primary hexagram, 18. Degeneration. Correcting degeneration is greatly developmental. It is beneficial to cross great rivers. 3 days before the start, 3 days after the start. Explanation. Degeneration means deterioration. As for the qualities of the hexagram, above is mountain, stopping, and below is wind, penetrating. It represents one yin entering and yang stopping it. Also, wind is inside stopping, representing stopping the yin so that it does not advance upward. It includes the meaning of correcting degeneration. This hexagram represents abandoning the false and returning to the true. It follows on the preceding hexagram, joy. Joy is harmonious action in accord with the time and in accord with truth. Not acting in any way that would be improper, so as to prevent degeneracy of action. When people are first born, they are utterly good, with no evil, integrated with natural principle. Originally, there is nothing to cultivate, nothing to realize. Since there is no defect, there is nothing to correct. But when they get to be 16 years old, yang peaks, producing yin. By the development of habits, they become estranged from what is near by nature. This is like the one yin of wind arising below two yangs. As negative energy advances, the original being degenerates. However, before the celestial Tao has yin, it cannot be yang. Before human affairs have degeneration, they cannot be repaired. This is why the path of correction of degeneracy is valuable. The path of correction of degeneracy is like the one yang of mountain stopping on top of two yins, not injured by negative influences. Using this one yang to go back to the root and return to life is the study of working on the fundamental. When the fundamental is established, the path develops. Once you recover your potential, it is like it was always there. This is attaining